Hi, I'm Sumana Harihareshwara of ChangeSet Consulting. I provide short-term, targeted project management services to open source projects and the organizations that depend on them. And today I'm talking about sidestepping the pull request bottleneck, 4 non-developer ways to support your upstream projects. And just so you know, I won't be sharing any slides today, so please feel free to look away from the screen, do some sit-ups, look out the window, fold some laundry or something. And if you prefer to read rather than listen, the written version of this is now up on my blog. If you want open source projects that you depend on to succeed and thrive, then you want to support them. And this is both philosophical, you want to be a good open source citizen, and pragmatic, you want to ensure the health of projects that you depend on. It's useful and important to do that through patches. One of the first times that I spoke at an open source conference was at Open Source Bridge 2010. I gave the talk, The Second Step, How to Encourage Open Source Work at For-Profits. I spoke on freeing up people in a company to contribute changes back, and I gave steps to widen your internal bottlenecks. But now, even if your developers have time to polish up changes and submit them upstream, it's very possible that when you submit a patch, there's now a bottleneck on the maintainer's side because they don't necessarily have a lot of time to do code review. You may have contributed pull requests, but they're languishing. And if a project is stuck because of the code review bottleneck, then that gift that you've given them isn't really helping. It's like you've given them a gift card to a store that's really hard to get to. So you're not really helping them substantively. Lack of time to do code review is really common in open source projects, so it's likely your pull requests are not helping as much as you would hope. And that's if your developers even have time to make and polish pull requests and patches. Maybe your developer resources are slammed, but you have other folks on your staff whose time is more flexible. So let's go into how you can develop a deeper toolbox and how you can help projects that you depend on, including by expanding their code review bottleneck, which benefits you and them. So today I'll share case studies and discuss 4 ways to help. Testing infrastructure. One of the most valuable ways that you can sponsor and support an open source project is through your operations department. Money. Whether you go with TideLift or another sponsorship option, direct donation can move the needle. Secondary mentorship. You can help new contributors get situated, stay unblocked, and stay contributors. And coaching and cheerleading. I'll talk about a time when being an encouraging sidekick made a huge difference. So first off, let's talk about how your operations department can help developer throughput for a project that you depend on by providing access to infrastructure for use in testing. As an open source project matures, it comes to a crossroads where maintainers have to ask, what platforms are we going to support? And how robust will our support be? And their access to testing infrastructure, especially for continuous integration, becomes a key turning point that determines how robust it will be. Let's say they want to support the 3 basic OSs, Windows, Mac, and Linux. But wait, which versions of those platforms will we support? And which Linux distributions? So now we already have at least 6 or 7 things to test. But what else are we going to support? AMD and Intel chips. People who do and don't have a particular soft dependency installed. People who run Python 3.5, 3.6, and 3.7. You can see how these options multiply out until the project has a test support matrix with, let's say, 56 environments. And often projects are limited enough that they can't rigorously and consistently test their whole matrix. A lot of open source projects can't afford paid continuous integration services, and they don't have enough virtual or physical computers to test all the environments that they want to support. So maybe 56 environments is too much to handle, and the project ends up with 2 tiers of support. Rigorously tested environments reflecting the developer's personal machines, and then everything else. If none of the developers use Windows, then Windows is in that might work category. Or the free tier of continuous integration services that they use could limit how many simultaneous jobs they can run. This happens a lot. And that slows down the revision and review cycle. Instead of taking 30 seconds or a minute to run CI, it might take 10 minutes or even an hour during peak contribution times like hackathons. This also creates pressure to reduce the number of tests that run on every patch, which means that maintainers have to take more time to review every patch before merging it. But you can help with this. As a company, you can help your upstream open source projects by providing infrastructure. Give them access so they can use your testing setup for their continuous integration. This is especially helpful if your cloud includes the ability to spin up proprietary OSs in virtual machines. Broader and faster CI helps developer throughput, and then in particular helps the code review cycle go faster. Next, money. Look, you're here at Upstream, so you know that subscribing to a project via Tidelift gives you better assurances of a project's security, reliability, and legal compliance. But you might be saying, Sumana, how does money specifically help widen the code review bottleneck? Let's talk from the point of view of maintainers and what they can do using lifter income. First off, with enough income, if a maintainer is spending their time at a job working on something else, sometimes they can quit and spend time on their open source project. I am going to take a moment now to talk about why that is sometimes, and it has to do with healthcare and health insurance. People in a lot of countries, when they quit a job or go to part-time, they don't have to worry about how that will affect their health insurance. Or if you're a tech worker in the US who doesn't depend on your employer for health insurance, you have some more flexibility. The more lifter money you get, the more time you can spend on open source. Like if you're a student getting health insurance through your school, or it's coming through your spouse or your parents, or you're a veteran or a senior citizen and you get health insurance through the government, for instance. But a lot of tech workers in the United States would need to make a lot of money from lifter income to quit their jobs, buy health insurance on the open market, and be confident that they'd be continuing to get that large stream of lifter income into the future so that they know that they can continue to afford it even if the prices of health insurance go up. Those are people who have less flexibility, and money might not translate so directly into more hours of work. All right, so back from that sidebar, but even if someone cannot quit their day job so that maintainer still has the same number of hours to spend on their open source project, money can still translate into better work for them. A huge example of this is equipment. A lot of people volunteering in open source have old or inadequate computers at home, or they don't have a proper desk. They don't have a good chair, a secondary monitor, stuff like that. A more efficient home office setup, even just a second monitor, can help the quality and speed of someone's work a tremendous amount. Some one-off donations can pay for that. Over time, a steady lifter income of, let's say, a few $100 a month can help someone move into a bigger place, pay more in rent or mortgage so they can have a proper home office with a door that closes and faster internet so they can work better. Another example is education. A lot of open source developers, when they want to learn a new skill, they default to looking for what they can read for free online. But someone who's getting some steady lifter income can pay for books or one-off tutorials to level up or subscribe to a paid content platform like O'Reilly's learning platform, which is $50 a month. And part of how we educate ourselves and each other is with conferences. But most conferences cost money to attend. Sometimes prices for conferences assume all the attendees have their registration costs covered by an employer or a university, and registration costs hundreds of dollars, even over $1,000 per ticket. Not to mention, if it's an in-person conference, travel and lodging costs. Lifter income can make the difference and make going to a conference affordable. Another example of how money can help is paying interns and freelancers. For example, a maintainer can save up lifter income to pay a freelance writer or designer to improve their website or documentation, which will save them user support time. Or, for example, a large one-time donation can help break a code review and release bottleneck. Here's an example. Last year, donations made it possible for my company, ChangeSet Consulting, to hire an expert in GNU AutoConf, a key component in the GNU build toolchain. And ChangeSet Consulting was able to hire that GNU AutoConf expert to get a new release of AutoConf out the door 8 years since the most recent release. Zach Weinberg took more than 6 months to review and merge 157 patches, most of which were bug fixes, and make several beta releases along the way, and finally release AutoConf 2.70. Couldn't have done that without the donations. Or a maintainer can save up income to pay an intern and teach them to become a co-maintainer. For example, the Outreachy internship program costs a mentoring organization $6,500 US per intern. That's something that donations and lifter income can help with. Speaking of interns, let's talk about secondary mentorship. Let's talk about interns and secondary mentorship. Here is another way that a company can help. You can help a project develop new contributors and help them get further along the road to becoming co-maintainers. Think about the engagement funnel for an open source project that wants more contributors and more co-maintainers in the future. An individual contributor starts off not knowing that the project even exists, right? Then they become interested. If you're lucky, they start contributing. And if the project can retain and grow them, they may grow skilled and trustworthy enough to be promoted to become a co-maintainer of the project. And the more maintainers you have, the more time is available to do code review. You can help with a few parts of that funnel. For one thing, if the project isn't getting new people at the start of the funnel, your marketing department could help with that, with attracting new contributors in the first place. But a lot of the projects that you're working with, that we're talking about here at Upstream, are actually bottlenecked further along than that. Maintainers don't have enough time to mentor the contributors that they have and grow them to the level where they can promote them. So I recommend that you help with that by providing secondary mentorship. What does that mean? Well, when an open source project is trying to grow new contributors, they often work with internship programs like Outreachy, which I mentioned, or Google Summer of Code. The way that works is someone from the project, such as a maintainer, mentors an intern who's often new to open source for 3 months. But that mentor is usually doing this on top of their existing responsibilities. And they're often pretty new to the work of management. And they're almost always managing remotely, which is harder than in person when you're training someone new. And sometimes this intern has never had a professional job before, or a job in the technology industry, and has to learn basic professional or industry skills along the way. So that mentor, who's one of the project maintainers, of course, they have a lot of domain knowledge about the project's code base, but they could probably use an extra pair of hands. And this is where you can come in. You can be a secondary mentor. A secondary mentor does not need to be an expert in or even a contributor to the project code base. So here's an example. When I was working on MediaWiki a few years ago, I worked with an Outreachy intern named Francis Hocutt. This was his first programming job. He was switching careers out of the sciences, out of chemistry. Francis's project was to evaluate and improve the web API client libraries for MediaWiki in 4 languages: Perl, Python, Java, and Ruby. One of his mentors was me, but I gathered a co-mentor and 2 technical advisors, engineers who have different strengths, live in different time zones, and all promise to respond to questions within 2 business days. Francis was reading and writing code in 4 different languages. It was great that he was able to get guidance in all of them from these different team members. The other guys had very different perspectives. Talif has worked in several open source contexts, but had never worked on MediaWiki. So he could approach MediaWiki's API with learner's mind and help Francis by modeling how he reasoned about it. Brad had hacked on the API itself and maintained a popular Wikipedia bot that uses it. And Merlin is a maintainer of an existing client library that lots of Wikimedians use. I, as a mentor, brought deep knowledge of our technical community, our social norms, and project management. And I was in charge of the daily communication, hey, are you blocked? So that we could avoid deadlocks. This worked really well. It made it possible for people to take vacations without Francis getting stuck and to have more guidance available from day to day to help him stay unblocked and always have a next action that he could take, but also on bigger topics like about programming careers and engineering standards and how to judge whether his work was good enough. And after his internship, Francis actually got hired by the Wikimedia Foundation. It was a successful project and a successful outcome, retention. Outreachy now highly recommends that every intern has at least 2 mentors in their How to Mentor FAQ. And in fact, when I run these mentorship programs at an open source project, I often mandate that every intern has 2 mentors. See if you can complement a primary mentor by being in a different time zone and bringing different skills like project management, technical communication, or testing. You do not have to be a developer to do this. As long as you are reasonably literate in open source process in general, and you actually like helping people learn, you can really improve the odds that an intern will succeed at their internship, want to stick around, and get closer and closer to becoming a project co-maintainer. Finally, let's talk about the 4th approach I want to recommend to you, coaching and cheerleading. I'll talk about a time when being an encouraging sidekick made a huge difference. I did some volunteer work last year helping rejuvenate pipenv, a command line tool that some people use to help handle Python packages that they make and use. Pipenv's maintainers had not released a new version since November 2018, and users were getting concerned and in some cases switching to competitors. So in early March 2020, someone suggested that perhaps the official Python packaging user guide should stop recommending it. I saw this suggestion and I went into the relevant Internet Relay chat channel to nudge one of the pipenv maintainers and ask, hey, what do you need? What's blocking you? Dan knew what was blocking him. He said, if you're purely evaluating how do we release the code, yeah, I might just be the main roadblock. And he said that what he needed was someone to yell at me to stop doing things that are not related to the goal. I said, if you just want someone to yell at you to stop doing those unrelated things, would you actually listen to that person? And he said, historically speaking, I'd insist I was doing something important briefly, but probably reassess. I do know what needs to happen. So over the next 3 months, I donated about 15 hours of my time. Given my current hourly rates, this constitutes a donation worth a few $1,000s, which is infinitesimal compared to the value unlocked by expediting a pipenv release. And with those 15 hours of work, I enabled Dan to fix bugs, do code review, merge several pull requests, and make the release. Remember, releases mean that your patches get not only reviewed, but also released, so you don't have to maintain a fork. All in all, with my help, Dan released 2 betas, then a stable version in May. What Dan needed was someone to help him with prioritization, release management, and communications. So I rewrote the release checklist, and I kept it updated. I updated GitHub issues and tweeted to keep users apprised and to ask them for help testing the beta releases, including suggestions of specific cases to test and requests for specific expertise when Dan ran into nasty continuous integration bugs. I created draft outlines for him to fill in so that he could write a status update and the beta release announcement for mailing lists and forums. I closed duplicate GitHub issues asking, is pipenv dead? And I updated a longer-term issue about maintainer needs, roadmap, and so on. And I made a few documentation pull requests. I helped move the pipenv docs from a non-functioning domain to a better one. I fixed a bunch of obsolete links, and I edited Dan's how to release documentation and made a pull request to move those into the repository out of an ephemeral hackpad. And every few days, I checked in with Dan via IRC or email. We also had a few video calls, and I helped him stay on task. And that was 15 hours in total. Those 15 hours of coaching and communication and cheerleading enabled Dan to review pull requests, fix bugs, and get that release out. And since then, pipenv has made releases on a pretty steady clip. So an external perspective can help a lot. You can be that person, whether you call yourself a sidekick, a project manager, a cheerleader, a coach, or something else. You can be a supportive accountability partner who helps with the bits that one specific maintainer or one set of maintainers don't have time for or might not be that great at. And you don't have to know the project code base to do this or be a feature level developer. The only pipenv code I touched was the docs. If you or your company depends on an open source project and you're getting annoyed or worried because the release cadence is slowed to a standstill, or there's a big code review backlog, there is a strong chance that you can turn that around. If someone on your team can spend a few hours complimenting the existing maintainers, complimenting what's missing, and helping unblock them, that could save you a bundle compared to forking or switching dependencies. Try talking with the maintainers about what they need. And I do mean talking, as in synchronous conversation via voice or chat, so that you can build some trust and get the kind of conversation that I had with Dan. So those are 4 approaches: testing infrastructure, money, secondary mentorship, and coaching and cheerleading. They can all move the needle to increase the health and resilience of projects that you care about and decrease the code review backlog so that your patches can get into the main line and get released. I am Sumana Harihareshwara. I can help you make a lot of this happen through my consultancy, ChangeSet Consulting. And let's talk more in the chat after this talk, because I would love to hear your stories about what works. Thank you.